Roger, you're over here as a guest curator with the Dublin Irish Film Festival in conjunction with the Hong Kong International Film Society.
And the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office in Brussels, yes.
And could you tell us about this weekend's events in the Lighthouse Cinema in Smithfield?
Sure. We put together, from the Hong Kong International Film Festival, a program of martial arts movies, basically actually to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office in Brussels. And they're responsible for trade and culture matters that concern Hong Kong. So it seemed a good opportunity to do some film-related event. And of course, cinema or films are one of Hong Kong's more visible branding opportunities, if I can put it that way. I think they're also quite an important export, but not as huge as perhaps one might expect. But film definitely is one of the best ambassadors for Hong Kong. And so when we were putting the program together, we were kind of working out, well, what is Hong Kong's unique contribution to world cinema? And just as, you know, the Western is to Hollywood and musicals are to Bollywood, I think kung fu films are to Hong Kong cinema. So we put together this a small selection of Hong Kong martial arts movies that try and show a number of Hong Kong talents, such as Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan, Sammo Hung, at a time perhaps just before or on the cusp of the big digital revolution of special effects and massive wire work and things like that. I mean, Kung Fu itself as a discipline is centuries old. Kung Fu films are over 100 years old, I guess. So it's in the continuum of the evolution of martial arts cinema, I guess one is saying that whatever you do, it's always going to be a snapshot. So our snapshot is of this period of real Kung Fu. Just at the moment, I think, when Hong Kong movies were going out to the world, and then just before this digital revolution.
Yeah, again, the 80s, I suppose, is one way of saying that.
Yes, although we also include Bruce Lee's great movie, The Way of the Dragon, which was made, I think, in 71, 72. And then also Che Huck's one of his masterpieces, I think, Once Upon a Time in China #2, which was, I think, made in 1992 or so. So those are kind of like, you know, the two extremities in one sense. But yes, we're talking about largely 80s movies.
And I suppose the only one contemporary film amongst those is Righting Wrongs with Cynthia Rothrock.
Yes, that's Corey Yun's film. Corey Yun, of course, is one of the great martial arts choreographers of Hong Kong cinema, and he's worked in the United States and Hollywood as well. I think one of the reasons was that Cynthia Rothrock herself is a largely forgotten figure, I think. And yet she's a unique figure in Hong Kong cinema because I think she's the only, or one of the few, but I think the only Western woman martial artist in Chinese cinema. And, you know, you don't see this sort of thing every day. And although I haven't really kind of brushed up on her filmography, watching Righting Wrongs reminds us how great a martial artist she actually was as well. And I think she's due for a kind of rediscovery. I was talking to someone else and said it's a Quentin Tarantino moment, probably. And yes, I think it would be nice to see someone like that recognized for really the skills and her uniqueness actually in the history of cinema. You know, okay, whether you think she's a great actress or not, you know, I think that's really debatable. But, you know, she's a great martial artist, and I think she deserves probably more recognition than she's gotten.
She said an interesting thing in an interview one time. She said that when she'd been in Hong Kong for a period of time doing stunt work and that, she'd come back home to Hollywood and she'd make a film and she'd be quickly reminded that she was hurting the rest of the crew, which she kind of calmed down a bit.
Yes, I mean, you know, Hong Kong, that says quite a lot because Hong Kong films, of course, quite high energy. So I guess it's there are no moments in a sense where, you know, there are dead time, so to speak. I think Righting Wrongs is an interesting movie. I mean, it talks about the convolutions of a kind of, say, business and legal shenanigans, I suppose one would say. And in one sense, it is something of a kind of reflection of what was going on at the time, you know. And when we had the ICAC, the anti-corruption unit in Hong Kong, making some progress in terms of making business practices more transparent. So this film, which is about, you know, righting wrong, so to speak, and maverick justice, I suppose, reflects something of the way people felt at the time.
In essence, Kung Fu has always been about the underdog fighting the bully.
Yes, it has, and it's always about the principled hero versus the conspiracy of and collusion of business and government. So in the Wong Fei-hung films in particular, and Once Upon a Time in China #2 is one of those, I think that comes very much to the fore. It's directed by one of Hong Kong's greatest directors, Tsui Hark. I always think with Tsui Hark that there's never a straight line. It's always there's always a certain convolution to his narrative. And in Once Upon a Time in China, it's interesting because, you know, it's 3 or 4 parties fighting each other. And I think this is something also that we find, interestingly enough, on reflection, because you don't really notice it at the time, but on reflection, something about the narratives of Hong Kong cinema as well. We have another film called Duel to the Death, for example, which is by Ching Siu-tung, who is one of the great martial arts choreographer. He made a Chinese ghost story, which is probably his most well-known film internationally. But Duel to the Death is his directorial debut, and it's basically a duel between a Chinese and Japanese martial artist. But for some reason, and it still baffles me to this day, their fight and their relationship is constantly interrupted by a group of ninjas. So ninjas appear on kites at sea, the whole thing, and so it's a sort of triangular struggle between the Japanese martial artist, the Chinese martial artist, and this group of anonymous ninjas.
They're appealing for the Japanese market.
Probably, yes. There is of course there is a ninja subgenre in martial arts films, which I have to admit I haven't really studied, but they do appear from time to time. Yes.
But as I said, like, it seems Chinese claim that martial arts originate from China anyway and spread out towards places like Japan and Korea.
Yes, they do, because you know, most Chinese believe that martial arts originated in the Shaolin Temple, and then over the years fanned out across Asia.
Which is a genre in its own within Kung Fu cinema.
Definitely, and you know, Shaolin monks were the high priests of martial arts and continue to be regarded so today, actually. So you constantly see references to Shaolin, but you know, the Shaolin Temple was burned down a few times, so there are films about that, and then how the monks or the martial arts that they embodied traveled around the region, and particularly in China.
Talk a little bit about that wonderful kind of supernatural comedies that seem to be very 80s inspired phenomena.
Yes.
Sammo Hung and the like.
Sammo Hung is probably the progenitor of them, although there is a kind of precedent in some of the films of Lau Ga-leung, Liu Jialiang, who is one of the great Hong Kong filmmakers and martial arts choreographers. I think he started to use some of this, what we call, I guess, comedy kung fu. And then Sammo Hung, who is really, truly great filmmaker and performer, I think, made Spooky Encounters. I think it's around 1983 or so, which was the first of this type of ghost kung fu film. And that transformed gradually into the Kung Si, or the Mr. Vampire type of movie, which is zombies who basically, how should I say, hop around. And this is based on the idea of moving dead bodies, because a guy who dies away from home is never going to find peace. So there were a group of corpse walkers, as they are known, who were able to animate these people and to walk them home, so to speak. So in these Mr. Vampire movies, and to some extent in these Spooky Encounter and these ghost kung fu films, you see a guy animating a group of zombie type people. They're all dressed in Qing Dynasty garb, and they're all hopping away, and they can do kung fu as well in these movies. But in the tradition, actually the corpse walker was supposed to be able to, and this is real, I mean, he was supposed to be able to animate the guys and take them home. There is actually...
Predates Haitian zombies.
Oh, does it? Yes. I'm not sure. The only thing I know about Haitian zombies is, I think, Val Lewton horror movies. But in fact, I hate to burst everybody's bubble, but I did read a very interesting story, which is a real-life account of corpse walkers, I think about 10 years ago. And in fact, of course, the guy can't animate the dead body, but what he has is he walks and he's got his poor assistant with the corpse strapped to the guy's back or front, and that guy has to walk along. It's a hell of a way to make a living, I think.
Interestingly enough, we mentioned Mr. Vampire, and you mentioned, Chinese ghost story to go back to.
Yeah.
Again, with that very interesting kind of theme of ghosts and humans never being able to interact.
Yes.
There's elements of that in Spooky Encounter, I think, as well, isn't there? And in Mr. Vampire.
Yes, there is. I think the idea is that, the Chinese concept of ghosts is quite different from the Western idea, I guess. In the West, ghosts are sometimes very scary, spooks, so to speak. But in Chinese culture, the idea of a ghost is that they are omnipresent and they are just there. Whether you can see them or not depends on your ability, in a sense. So in Spooky Encounters, we see this there's this great scene where Sammo Hung is looking at himself in a mirror, and in fact the ghost, I mean, it seems to have been probably borrowed, if I can put it that way, from Poltergeist and the TV set. The ghost stretches right out of the mirror and tries to grab him.
So, what's the highlight of these films for yourself? You had to pick.
I think, I don't usually pick favorites, but I really liked Once Upon a Time in China #2. I hadn't seen it for some time, actually, but it strikes me that this is really quite a key work in Tsui Hark's evolution as the prime filmmaker today in China of these huge special effects movies. And Once Upon a Time in China 2 was made before as I said, on the cusp, really, of the technological or the digital revolution. So it actually combines some rudimentary technology, I suppose, or digitization, together with real martial arts skills. And Jet Li is superb as Wong Fei-hung in the film. And it's also a role, I think a star-making role, actually, for Donnie Yen as a bad guy in the film. And you can see in the fighting styles between Jet Li and Donnie Yen, there's a contrast there. Jet Li is, as Wong Fei-hung, is clean, efficient, and very neat and concise. And Donnie Yen is much more flamboyant. He uses one of these favorite Tsui Hark tricks, which is to use a very flexible, either a piece of string or rope. In Donnie Yen's case, he's using a long piece of cloth as a kind of weapon. And to turn something that's soft, like a bamboo thing, into something that's hard and can be used as a weapon is quite fundamental as well to some martial arts thinking. And I think Tsui Hark does it really well in this particular movie.
I suppose it brings us to the final thing to discuss would be Wong Fei-hung himself, who was the earliest Kung Fu films were about this remarkable man.
Well, in Hong Kong, I think the Wong Fei-hung films that appeared in the late 40s with Quan Tap Hing as Wong Fei Hung, he became synonymous with the character, and he played that role, I think, into the 60s and also on TV. And it's very important, those Wong Fei Hung films of the 40s, they seem maybe a little clunky to us today, but because the backdrops are all painted, etc., etc. But what they show is real kung fu, because the fathers of Liu Jialiang and also Yuen Wo-ping were in those films, and they are doing real martial arts. And the fact is that in the 40s, they were still within striking distance of some of the original, or some of the important martial artists of Southern Kung Fu who learned their skills from the Shaolin Temple. So it's like saying that, well, these guys made westerns in the 1920s and they knew Annie Oakley and Billy the Kid and things like that. So this is really the equivalent.
Roger, thank you very much. That was great information.
Thank you.